Sandeep, and you are watching the Indian Weekender. Today, we are in conversation with leader of Labour Party and Prime Minister, Honorable Jacinda Ardern, who is able to join us over the phone from somewhere in South Island, where she is on the road campaigning for the election. So, thank you for joining us today, Prime Minister. How are you today?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you. I'm speaking to you from Dunedin today.
Right, okay. And first of all, how are you feeling after last night's terrific performance in the leaders' debate?
Oh, good. Look, we have four major leaders debates, and all of them are quite different. The one last night had an audience of several hundred people, and so it changes up the environment for the debate. But a good chance to see a contest of ideas and different perspectives from the leaders. That's at least what I hope that voters saw.
Sure. And there is a growing consensus that progressively in the last three debates, you have evolved into a more steelier and combative version of yourself, which probably many people would believe that that's not your natural self. So, how you're finding that transition? Is this something that you're comfortable in?
Well, I think if anyone watches the debating chamber, they'll see that I'm certainly as assertive in that environment as well. Look, my people will also know my natural tendency, of course, is to try and let everyone have their say, not to talk over others. But it's also equally really important that you take the moment to be able to get your perspective across. So in these debates, unfortunately, it does mean that there's a little bit of crossover in when we're talking. But I think we're still getting a sense of who we are and what we represent.
Sure. So, is it fair to say that it was more a conscious response to the deluge of media commentary that you might have been getting that Prime Minister needs to bring more stealth to her performance in the leaders' debate? So, was it a more
Oh,
conscious response, or was it just a natural reaction to dealing with leader of opposition?
yeah, more really a response to needing to make sure that I was getting my and Labor's point of view across. And if that means that you're unable to do it in a way that is about waiting a turn because of the nature of the debate, then I'm willing just to go in and insert. And also, there were things being said that just weren't accurate, and so it is my job to correct that too. But ultimately, my view is voters know me. They know my style of politics. They know my form of leadership. And I think that they'll, as much as anything, not just rely on leaders' debates, but reflect on what they know of me over the last 3 years too.
Sure. So, your style of politics of kindness is still safe and it's not going to recede in background
Oh yes,
in your next
no,
term?
no, not at all. That's who I am, and that doesn't change. But I've always maintained you can be both kind and strong.
Sure. Now, Madam Prime Minister, talking about your brand of politics of kindness, there has been some criticism especially within the ethnic minority, migrant communities, which believe that the politics of kindness has been selective and not reaching to migrant communities in most cases. Is that a fair criticism, or would you rebut that?
No, I would push back on that. But at the same time, I utterly acknowledge that in this environment right now, it is incredibly tough because of our border closures. It has caused distress for people. We have had, there are limits to how many we're able to safely quarantine, so we've had to prioritise citizens and permanent residents. But as we've had capacity, we have been opening up. So you will have seen that those who are essentially ordinarily resident in New Zealand, those who are in relationships and have had their partners stranded offshore, we've been working through and progressively bringing in those additional people. And we've actually just obviously also opened up additional classes of visas for those who are in high need areas where we need skills as well.
Well, okay. Well, Madam Prime Minister, I think there are too many issues, but the criticism that I was referring to is not necessarily limited to post-COVID response of the border closure. Probably there has been a lot of immigration chaos, even before the COVID things, like the processing time of visa applications, permanent residency application, partnership visa application. That has really ballooned under the watch of your government. Say people they have been in the queue for probably 9 to 18 months, and they have been waiting for an outcome of their residency application, and then COVID hit upon us, so turning their
Yes.
life upside down. So the criticism is not limited to the post-COVID response. It has been pre-COVID immigration as well.
And look, I acknowledge that we have had high demand and that we do have a number of people who seek to have work rights in New Zealand. Of course, COVID has created extra disruption. What we've tried to do for those who are already legal in New Zealand, legally here in New Zealand, working in New Zealand, is try and ensure that COVID hasn't caused them disruption over, the ability of them to legally stay, and that our inability because of COVID to process or for people to depart if they need to, trying to make sure that no one has their status become illegal in that situation. So we've tried to really smooth that path for people who are here. Obviously, though, COVID has changed everything. And so whilst, yes, we had visa processing issues, in terms of time it takes, because we just have a number of people seeking to be legally able to reside in New Zealand, that has been exacerbated by COVID. And so that is our new reality.
Well, I will come back to that. I do understand COVID has complicated things, but even in the pre-COVID
But what you're
environment,
asking
yes.
is for a situation that doesn't exist anymore.
Well,
In the COVID environment, we simply cannot process visas for people that then aren't able to enter New Zealand. That creates false hope.
that's the point.
We need to work through those
Sure.
that have a chance to.
No,
And at
I
the
do
moment,
understand.
with
I
the
do
borders
understand.
figures up, we have to move through bit by bit, and that's what we're doing.
Well, the thing is, like people, their lives, they have been in the queue for 18 odd months. And where is the kindness when we go back and talk to those families whose life has been disrupted for no fault of their own, because they were in the queue with reasonable jobs that were stable before COVID has disrupted everything. So how we
Yes, and
can
it has.
address their situations?
And as I say, that no one wants to be in the situation that we find ourselves in now. No one wants the border closures we have. No one wants the situation we've got jobs and visas that were dependent on those jobs have been upended. We've had countless harrowing stories, and they are awful. But that is the situation we find ourselves in. And so we are trying to work through in a way that acknowledges the disruption people have experienced. That's why we've gone through for those who are already here and may have been separated, those who have been disconnected from partners, from family, and working through the highest needs first, because we do want to keep that focus on people. So that has been the way we've been making our way through those needs.
Sure. Now, talking about the partners, and your government is trying to let partners in on humanitarian grounds. Are you aware that the partners based on Indian marriages, they are still being disadvantaged even after the latest relief announced by Immigration Minister? Are you aware of that disadvantage being meted out to relationship based on Indian marriages?
Is that in a response to? Is that a reference to the changes not having made the difference you anticipated, or is it specific to COVID issues in light of those changes?
Well, it is
because
actually,
no, I haven't had that. I haven't had that raised. No.
Yes, well,
You'll know that we of course work to try and resolve that issue.
Sure.
And for
I
good
will explain
reason.
you now,
We
Prime
didn't-
Minister. I will explain you now. It's a sad state of affairs that you have yet not been relayed about this impending crisis. So what has actually happened is
You'll
that
recognise that we've got a number of immigration issues that we're trying to deal with in
sure.
the
And right now,
environment
what's
we're in. But by
I
all means,
I completely understand you have got an entire nation to look after. I do understand, acknowledge that. I put that responsibility on others within your caucus, including on the Kiwi Indian MP, that they should be raising this issue with the Prime Minister and lobbying for a solution. So what's happening right now is that despite your government's announcement on letting the partners from visa favor countries to come in, what is happening is that legitimate couples of Indian
I
partners.
do know about that issue. And of course, because that it's not just those who are visa-free, the visa-free countries. Obviously, it's easier to process them quickly. We're then working through the individual cases of others. So it's not that they're just barred. We just have to work through those a little more systematically.
No, I get it. Still, it's not the issue that I'm trying to raise with you today. The issue is that the partners of New Zealand residents and citizens who have chosen to go and marry on the basis of Indian traditional marriages, those marriages are
Yes.
still not being recognized within the immigration policy for the purpose of partnership visa. So, what has happened is that hundreds and hundreds of people who have been given another class of visa, just a normal general visitor visa in the pre-COVID environment, on the basis of their relationship with New Zealand citizens and residents, and allowed to come and enter and join their partner in New Zealand. So what has happened after COVID? Immigration New Zealand is refusing to honor those general visitor visa category based on relationship. And
And so those will still be being able to be considered. Absolutely, they will still, in the same way that that relationships are considered by Immigration New Zealand to establish that they are indeed partners in an informal relationship. If they don't have an existing relationship visa, then Immigration New Zealand have to go through the process to establish that relationship. So they'll still be doing that. I haven't had individual cases brought to me, but if you're saying there are hundreds and hundreds, that certainly will be something that the Immigration Minister will be aware of.
sure, we are definitely raising the issue, but I just want to bring to your attention that there is huge
Sure.
expectation within the Kiwi Indian community who are seeing that probably there is a bias towards Indian marriages. And I will leave it with you, and probably we will follow it
I
up.
wouldn't express it. I would not express it in that way at all. I think it would be unfair to say that there is any bias against Indian marriages. So I would really reject that. We've worked really hard to make sure that prior to COVID, we did have proper recognition of cultural practice that was problematic in the previous immigration guidance. To recall that we worked to try and address that issue.
I certainly
will be
recall and
And so this
appreciate
will
your
be
intervention at that stage. That
yes,
was
and so
widely
this will
acknowledged.
be.
But I also want to make my
And
point
if
that
I could just finish,
yes,
my sentence.
sure,
So of course, this will be another issue that upended for Immigration New Zealand is that they are now working in an environment where they're having to establish, without the ability of travel, issues around visa application. In some cases, those visa processing people we've had offshore haven't been able to work in our immigration offices either because of lockdowns. A number of issues have exacerbated visa processing. So it's not fair to say that there is bias here.
I completely agree
The
with your
nature of the
explanation.
impact of COVID. It's made it very difficult.
Sure. Prime Minister, I do agree with your explanation that COVID has disrupted, and we acknowledge that. But the facts that we
Yes.
are trying to put to you humbly is basically about pre-COVID things. So just referring back to the changes that were brought in after your kind intervention last year in terms of culturally arranged marriage visas, Indian Weekender has pursued that a bit in Immigration New Zealand, and what we were able to establish that not a single visa was issued on the basis of culturally arranged marriage visa, the new category that was
And
announced.
if you want to share that information directly through to me, I am happy to look at it. Unfortunately, it wasn't one of the things you flagged that you wanted some detail on.
Sure, no,
Had
I
it been,
completely understand.
I would have looked into it before we spoke.
Surely,
But
Prime
please feel
Minister.
free to share that.
Definitely, I will follow it up with you. It is a very important issue for a broader Kiwi Indian community, and we
Great.
need to raise
I
that with you.
understand.
Let's move on and talk
Yeah.
more about
I'll
other
just
important
flag
issues.
with you that I'm sure. I'll just give you a quick flag with you that I'm just pulling up to the airport, so I can take a few more questions, but unfortunately I will have to go into the airport eventually. So I just thought I'd give you notice.
Sure. Thanks very much. I will be very quick. Let's move on to housing issue. Housing was one of the major issues last time when you were campaigning in 2017 elections, and we have seen a lot of resolve and commitment from your side, from yourself, in addressing that housing crisis, which is missing in this election. So, do you think? What's happening with the housing crisis? Do you think we have solved the crisis, or we have almost
No.
given up on the crisis?
No, we haven't solved it, and nor would we in 3 years. It's taken many, many years to create the situation that we're in now, but nor would I argue for a moment that we've given up on our resolve around it either. You know, when we came in, we banned foreign buyers in the New Zealand residential market. We closed tax loopholes. We stopped the sale of state houses. We improved tenancy legislation. We have built and created over 5,000 public housing places. We created a residential developer underwrite scheme that means that we've continued to see an increase in the number of residential developers now building affordable homes, and also KiwiBuild had a role to play in that as well. We've improved the quality of housing that's available through our standards around insulation and heating sources. We've doubled the number of transitional housing. We've rolled out a homelessness plan that means we have housing first now, not just in our city centres, but across the country, and it's housed and supported over 1,000 people and has the ability to support over 1,000 people.
Sure.
So I'm very proud of what we've done in housing, but we are not finished.
Sure. Well, I acknowledge that a lot has been achieved under your term, I would say, but still we have not been able to address the issue of affordability of housing and housing prices. So when do you think, or what plan you have got to address that issues?
Well, progressive home ownership, I think for us, it's about overcoming the barriers that first home buyers experience. Some will often have the ability to pay a contribution to a mortgage, particularly with low interest rates, but the deposit is the barrier. Welcome home loans and those schemes that are available for first home buyers, we've reduced down the amount that they need for a deposit through schemes like that. We've also introduced progressive home ownership where people can go into a home without necessarily having the deposit up front. Those kinds of initiatives are helping people get a foot in the door. But I would acknowledge actually since we've been in government, the percentage of the market that's made up by first home buyers has increased. So that's heading in the right direction.
Right, thank you very much. Well, let's quickly move on before I have to let you go. Let's talk about economy. Madam Prime Minister, we have been hearing quite often from your government that we are in the middle of once in a 100-year global pandemic, which is the right point to make. But after our successful management of COVID so far, and given that New Zealand is in a unique position, don't you think New Zealand, like we have got a once in a generation opportunity to make changes within our economy? Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I would agree with that, which is why you're seeing us making sure that we are not just investing in infrastructure, not just creating jobs, but creating jobs that are supportive, that help investing in infrastructure that address long-term challenges like the housing crisis. We've said we want to build 8,000 public houses. We want to investigate, a hydro scheme that would mean New Zealand moves to 100% renewable. We're using this moment in our history to invest in the things that we need for the long term.
Sure. Now, Madam Prime Minister, we are, like New Zealand is primarily considered as a low-wage economy. So are you giving any thought of transforming this nature and making a high-paying, high-productive economy?
Yes, that has to be part of our agenda as well. Unfortunately, our view is that the last government focused on the housing market and unfortunately, a housing crisis is part of an economic growth strategy. We need much more than that. We need to make sure that we've got, for instance, R&D growth of highway jobs, that we're investing in our exporters that also support those decent jobs. Those are the kinds of things that will make a difference. We've also had a strategy of working alongside the tech sector to grow that sector, the screen sector, those areas where New Zealand has a really unique offering and where we see those decent jobs.
Sure. Now, another thing that we have been consistently hearing, both from your detractors and from the community as well, has been...
Just if I can, this might have to be our last question, unfortunately. I'm now sitting outside the airport.
Thank you very much. I will just make it my last question. Sure. If I have to ask you that increasing the minimum wage, well, of course, this is a good intention and we all acknowledge that. But the thing is, it is causing some pain on the small businesses who are feeling the heat during this COVID environment. So do you think that's a right move to make now and risk those businesses who are trying to stand up on themselves?
It wasn't that long ago that we were talking about the importance of our essential workers, and a number of those essential workers were working in organisations that pay the minimum wage. In fact, the greater percentage of larger firms rather than small ones pay the minimum wage. We need to make sure that the minimum wage is a wage that people can survive on. And at the moment, unless we continue to see those increases, we won't see people able to survive. And so for us, it is about constantly making sure we've got that balance, factoring in the pressure on small business, supporting them in other ways, but also making sure that people can survive from their work.
Sure. Now, one last thing before I let you go and catch your flight, Prime Minister. What's your appeal to, say, key Indian voters? Why should be they voting for Labour Party in this coming election?
So the certainty, the stability, and the plan. In my view, and particularly as you've said, when we're in the middle of a 1 in 100 year pandemic and economic crisis, we have been the team that has, delivered a really strong health response, and we will continue to do so. We're also asking for people to stick with us as government so that we can continue to roll out that economic plan as well. I don't think people should risk change right now.
Okay. So thank you very much for that
Great.
message, Prime Minister. I will leave it for our voters to make what they want
Thank
to
you.
make out of it. And thanks for your time today. I wish you all the best
Thank
with your
you.
rest of campaign.
Talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you. So that was leader of Labour Party and Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern joining us from Dunedin, talking on a number of issues related to election and campaign, but most importantly, giving some firm commitment to Indian Weekenders' query on the Indian marriages that are facing an institutional bias within the immigration policy for the visa purposes. So Prime Minister has given us assurance to raise the issue directly with us, which we intend to do that robustly. So keep on watching Indian Weekender.